Good afternoon. You know, the people who are assembled. To my right is Ms. Melissa DeRosa, who is the Secretary to the Governor. To my left, Robert Mejica, Budget Director. To his left, Alfonso David, Counsel to the Governor. I sent a letter to President Trump today. I've been in government a long time in a various number of capacities. I've been in a presidential cabinet as Secretary of Housing and Urban Development. I've been Attorney General, Governor. I have never seen a federal government that has as consistently or deliberately targeted a group of states with what are truly negative, if not devastating consequences. It started with this federal government when they did the tax reform and they included SALT. SALT was a targeted economic assault. 15 states. The state that's hurt the most by the reduction of deductibility, state of New York, $15 billion, and we're the #1 donor state. The #1 donor state. We give $36 billion more to the federal government than we get, and they add a penalty to the #1 donor state, regardless of the fact that 40 states actually are states that receive more from the federal government than they give. The SALT effect on New York, if it is not repealed, can transform the economy. And if we don't tackle this problem, 10 years from now, we will look back and say, what was the turning point in New York's economic trajectory? And we will point to this. You cannot effectively increase people's taxes in this state to a high of 30% without consequence. Every state is in an economic competition. The Amazon competition was just a high-profile version of what goes on every day. Howard Zemsky at Empire State Development Corporation, me sitting at my desk, I get a call from a business every day saying, I'm thinking of California, I'm thinking of Texas, I'm thinking of North Carolina. What can you offer to offset your taxes? You then add a 30% burden to that. You hurt our economic competitiveness significantly. Property taxes, which are the highest in the nation in New York, as you know, you take those property taxes, which we've worked so hard to cap and regulate the growth, and then you say overnight to the people on Long Island, oh, by the way, your taxes are going up 30%. You will accelerate the people leaving New York. You could possibly affect the home values, and that will then spiral. That was SALT. Second, the president puts out his budget. Again, with cuts targeted to those same states and hitting New York dramatically. Medicaid cuts, $4 billion this year. How could we even begin to make up a $4 billion cut? Cut TANF, cut the SNAP program, cut CDBG, Community Development Block Grant Program, a program I used to run, which is basic community development for poorer communities. Cut the HOME program, which is an affordable housing program. Devastating to the state of New York. Complicating getting the budget done, because now you have this big question mark out there of looming federal cuts. Well, the president proposed $4 billion. What will it actually be? Who knows? $4 billion, $3 billion, $2 billion? Any answer is devastating for the state. and you don't know. Well, it's only a presidential proposal. Yeah, it's like saying my budget is only a gubernatorial proposal. It's a serious proposal. And it usually doesn't go away. You can say, well, it's going to be modified by the Congress. Okay, to what percent? And we've seen how sympathetic this Congress is to New York. So we have to conclude a budget with this big unknown question mark, which we won't know until sometime down the road. The third item that illustrates the same point is the Department of Transportation coming out and saying the Hudson River tunnels are a low priority, which is absurd. It is just absurd. In their project description, they describe the Hudson River Tunnel as 106 years old, owned by Amtrak. Why is that important? Who owns Amtrak? President Donald Trump. That is a Trump tunnel. That is a Trump tunnel. You know how he likes to put his name on properties that he owns? We should put up a big sign as the trains are coming in, you're entering the Trump tunnel, owned by Amtrak. One shareholder of Amtrak is the federal government. They are owned by Amtrak. The description says they're 106 years old. The description says they were damaged by Hurricane Sandy. The description says that they are in a significant need of repair and can be delays. The description says 450 trains go through it, 200,000 daily trips for riders. And by the way, it serves the entire Northeast corridor. So it's not just New York, it's the whole Northeast corridor. It's a low priority. First of all, why is it a state's responsibility to pay to repair a federal tunnel? When this first came up about 4 years ago during the Obama administration, my first response was, why isn't it a federal responsibility? We don't own it. We don't have trains that go through it. Why shouldn't the federal government pay 100%? People said, oh, you don't think of it that way. This is an important priority. You should participate. All right, we have no legal obligation. But we said if you want to say morally or just practically to help it get going, we agree with the state of New Jersey to contribute $6 billion, which is real money for us, right? $3 billion per state. New Mario Cuomo Bridge, $4 billion. You can do a lot with $3 billion. Port Authority votes and approves $2.7 billion for the project. They come back and say, it's not enough. It's not enough. It's not our tunnel. It's not our property. It's our problem because we are a consequence of their inaction. But it is solely their property that they were supposed to maintain, they were supposed to repair, and if it has to be replaced, it's their business. But this Department of Transportation report basically says the Hudson tunnels are dead on arrival as a project for funding, while saying they are in desperate need for repair. My paraphrasing, not their language. We have no alternative as a state. We don't own it. It's not our financial obligation. I wouldn't have the legal authority to do anything. but it is a disaster waiting to happen. And everybody knows it, and nobody denies it. In their project description, they say it was significantly damaged. But it's a low to medium priority and is not going to receive funding. End of story. I went into the tunnels, I took videos, I sent the videos to the president, I went and met with the president, he looked at the videos, he confirmed what he saw in the video was a significant level of deterioration. I met with the Department of Transportation Secretary Chow, showed her the video, showed her the pictures, went through it, met with the congressional delegation. I believe this is one of the most egregious cases of government recklessness and malpractice. This is political retaliation. These are states that did not vote for the president. These are states which are primarily Democratic states. And I think they are governing by their political inclinations, both positive and negative. SALT, budget cuts, Hudson tunnels, all make the same point. It can't be a coincidence. And it's not that they're not aware of these issues. They're very aware of SALT. They're very aware of Medicaid cuts and TANF cuts. And they're very aware of the Hudson tunnels. And it is literally, as I said, it's only a matter of time. If you have to close one of the tunnels, you would have a tremendous backlog of delays, 450 trips, 200,000 trips through the two tunnels. And we have done everything we can. I was very blunt in the letter to the president, and I think everyone should know there are differences of opinion in government, and I respect that. We have them all day long. I don't believe this is a difference of opinion. I believe this is political retaliation, and I believe it's terrible. And I believe the president should be called on it, and that's what we're doing today. Questions?
Governor, on speed cameras, the legislature is passing a bill today that greatly increases the number.
You're going to go from this to speed cameras?
Getting us back to more New York-focused issues, if I could. I know you've been supportive of the program in the past, but given the number and how sizable it is, are you okay with that? Is it something you'll sign?
I support speed cameras. I actually went to great lengths last year when the Senate wouldn't approve the speed cameras. We came up with a very creative vehicle to do it through executive order because I wouldn't let lives be at risk because we were playing politics in Albany. So I support the speed cameras. I'll sign it.
Governor, the White House had signaled some openness to reconsidering SALT, or at least an openness to continuing the dialogue. Are you now concerned that that openness has closed?
I am dubious of White House signals. The White House sends many signals. The White House says many things, and many things change. Some things the White House says turn out not to be true. Sometimes what the White House says gets changed quickly. Now, there's an openness because they have to reopen the bill. They need to make changes in the bill. To make changes in the bill, you're going to need the House to vote for the changes. So by definition, the bill will be reopened. And what I am imploring the House, Speaker Pelosi, Senator Schumer on the Senate side, if they need a comma added to the bill, the House and the Senate should not make any changes without changing SALT. SALT affects 15 states, Democratic states, New York, California, the speakers from California. You take the New York delegation and the California delegation, if they insist on something in the House, you can't get something passed without them. Anything that, anytime they reopen that bill, I think it's the responsibility of the Speaker and our congressional delegation and Senator Schumer to insist that the change is made on SALT.
Senator Schumer yesterday, and did you meet him, and what did you talk about if you did?
I speak to the senator all the time. We've spoken about this multiple times. He does not have the clout that Speaker Pelosi has in the House, obviously, with majority control. But the Senate has rules that can make passing a bill very difficult. And if you put the senator together with Speaker Pelosi, that's a powerful combination.
The legislative leader suggested today that they're optimistic that the budget is going to get done by the April 1st deadline. Do you share that optimism?
Did they say that? They were optimistic?
I'm paraphrasing, but
Paraphrase. What was their word?
I can't recall specifically.
Well,
don't
I
wanna
need
misquote them.
their word if I'm going to comment on what they said.
But
I
they
can
seem-
comment on your paraphrasing of what
They
they
seem
said,
at
but that
the
would be
very
good.
least hopeful that the goal, I think you used the word goal, that the budget would get done by the end of this month, April 1st.
Yeah. You know, this is not my first rodeo, as you know. And it's binary. You get down to the point where we're at now. You either cross the goal line or not. Well, we're on the 5-yard line. We're in the red zone. Yeah, but now the clock is ticking. It actually gets harder closer to the goal because everybody backs up and you're in the tight quarters. And this is a hard budget. Don't kid yourself. There's a combination of factors. Number one, it's difficult on the numbers. We have a very large gap between our budget and the Assembly budget and the Senate budget. There's a large gap between what they would like to do and what they can do. You have a new Senate, which comes in with all new ideas and all promises, and they want to do everything. Unfortunately, they come in at a time where we have very few resources. The revenues are dropping. They dropped $2.8 billion. We're looking at a possible $4 billion Medicaid cut, which would destroy any of these scenarios. So it is a tough budget to do on the numbers. Secondly, you have a new Senate, and this is in and of itself a complicated process to get it done technically. You know, a budget winds up being thousands of pages. They work through the night. So when you get down to the period that we're at, you need to resolve the differences, and then you need to produce a budget. And it's getting close. I believe everybody's operating in good faith. We have had all good discussions. Everyone, I think, would like to get it done on time. But I don't know that we do get it done on time. That's why this year I've done it a little differently, because of it's a different situation. I've been very clear from day one on what I believed was required for an on-time budget. First, the numbers have to work, really. I'm not going to come back and do a mid-year correction, which is the worst thing. We have to have our eyes open and be aware of these potential federal cuts. It's not a joke. They're serious, and we have to take that into consideration. So the numbers have to work. Criminal justice reform, because we have been talking about it for 7 years. You know, the new Democratic Senate, Assembly, governor, all right, the things that we've been talking about for 7 years in this room, now they're supposed to pass, right? Cash bail, discovery, speedy trial, 364 days instead of 365 days, so they can't use a one-day discretion to deport people. We should be able to get that done. Permanent property tax cap, in the light of SALT, is a necessity. To say to homeowners, calm down. I understand we have a federal issue. By the way, we're working on the federal issue. We hope to repeal SALT. But don't panic, you have stability on your property taxes. Campaign finance reform, we've been talking about for 7 years. Let's do it. Let's do it. And a budget, well, it doesn't have to be in a budget. A budget is just numbers. No, a budget is not just numbers. And we all know that. A budget is the most significant plan you put together for the state. And the budget serves as a practical vehicle to say to everyone, it's time to decide now. Well, I'm thinking maybe this, maybe this, maybe this. We want to have more discussions. We want to discuss. Okay, when does it end? It ends when it has to end, right? When do you decide what restaurant you're going to? When you're walking out the door, you have to decide, because you have to drive right or you have to drive left. The budget serves as a decision-making point. We've been talking for 7 years. Everyone said we had agreement for 7 years. We're here now, so let's do it now. That's one of the purposes of the budget. And by the way, I often believe if you can't agree at the time of the budget, you're never going to agree. Because the budget is that moment. And education, we have had how many demonstrations of groups saying, fund the poorer schools? How many? How many acronyms of groups exist saying, fund poorer schools? My budget says, make a priority out of funding poorer schools. So congestion pricing, we even have the New York City mayor who agrees. And we know the MTA is in crisis. So congestion pricing and MTA reform, how can this not be a decision that's easily made?
Just on the, you're going to need more revenue probably unless you cut somewhere else to restore those Medicaid cuts that Robert was telling us about, the $550 million. So what, other than the pied-à-terre tax, what new revenue generating items are you considering or open to? I mean, there are casino lobbyists here today who are talking about accelerating downstate casinos. We've got people who want the ultra millionaires tax.
We have savings in the budget that Robert can go through with you. I am not open to new taxes. Look at everything we just talked about.
I said revenue, not taxes. Taxes among revenue.
Our taxes among revenue. The savings we have, Robert, why don't you go through the savings that we proposed in the budget?
We have built-in spending for different items in the budget that we have said, and I said this last time we met, that we have to reprioritize. So we've already talked to the legislature and said there are things that we said we would spend money on that we're going to do this year. They may be one-time expenses that we can revisit in order to address the healthcare cuts. But the healthcare cuts have to be the priority, and right now the legislature has not prioritized the spending. Senate budget was $3 billion out of balance. The Assembly budget was $2 billion out of balance. They were spending at 5%. So they haven't prioritized. So we're still billions of dollars apart, and we're less than 2 weeks out.
The leader said earlier today was that when you had your meeting yesterday, you all made a commitment to do the budget on time. Is there a path there to do that, or are you going to have to drop some of these items that you just mentioned out?
You can't make a commitment to do a budget on time. You can say, we will try to do the budget on time. But I would never commit to do a budget on time because, well, you can't commit to doing a budget on time. Okay, where the night before, it's a bad budget. But you said you're going to do it on time, so pass a bad budget. I would never say I'm going to pass a bad budget. I am committed to trying to get it done. We can get it done. I'm prepared to get it done. They have to work through their conferences, and in many ways, I think it's up to them. That's why I was very clear from day one, this is what I believe is in a budget. The Speaker would say, well, the governor's drawing lines in the sand. Yes, yes. Just as, by the way, the Assembly draws lines in the sand. We have to have education spending, we have to have this, we have to have this, we have to have this. Different houses have different priorities. But the list of priorities I've gone through with you from how many months? Criminal justice, MTA, permanent property tax cap, right? So everybody knew what it was, and numbers that actually add up. Math matters. But we are all positive conversations, all working in good faith, all trying, but to stay with my tortured analogy, you're down there 5 yards from the goal, and the goal line, you can see it. Yeah, it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get there. You know, those last 5 yards can be the hardest.
And those priorities that you've outlined, that's where you would say are the big differences right now? Because it sounds like everybody, yourself and the legislature, agree on the end goals, it's just the details.
No, I think the numbers are the problem. The numbers. Because the numbers are hard in this budget.
To go back to my question and maybe narrow it a little bit, you know, what do you think of this idea of accelerating the downstate casinos? They say that even if you had to pay the liquidated damages or make whole the existing upstate casinos.
I'm dubious about it, Jimmy, and it's a double bank shot. We're going to open up downstate casinos, and we're going to give money to the upstate casinos, but we don't want to bid the licenses. We want to give them to existing enterprises. Look, when we did casinos, we were very careful because there's a lot of money floating around and a lot of lobbyists floating around. And we were very careful to go through a process. It was primarily for upstate New York. And I am very skeptical about some casino deal put together by casino operators promising billions of dollars and everybody's happy. The problem with the numbers, they do a 6% increase in education. You can't do a 6% increase in education. You just can't do it. You don't have the money. Or you can do a 6% increase in education, but then starve health care. So these are tough choices on the numbers. And, you know, a new legislature, I don't want to make the tough choices. Find a way where I can say yes to everyone. There is no way to say yes to everyone here.
Governor, you still refuse to approve a budget deal with the legislature that wouldn't have the permanent tax cap or criminal justice? So say we get
Yes.
to April 1, you will
Yes.
not do it April 1?
Yes.
Governor, your counsel had previously said
The
that...
permanent tax, excuse me, the permanent tax cap, you're not Mr. Long Island, but you have some of the highest property taxes in the United States of America. Go tell someone who's paying $30,000 in income taxes, oh, by the way, they're no longer deductible. I know you've been very upset about them. The 30 is now 39,000, like that. Well, what happened to the 2%? Well, Donald Trump tax reform, 30 to 39. You could see people leave. You could see home values drop. By the way, anecdotally, we're hearing that home sales have slowed in Westchester and parts of Long Island. You start to see home prices drop, that is a frightening concept. So the permanent tax cap, you're right, it doesn't actually change their tax liability, but at least it's a way of saying there is stability and confidence, and your local taxes are not going up, and in the meantime, we're trying to fix the federal problem. That's why the permanent tax cap, well, it doesn't expire. It's not about that. It's about saying to you at a moment of anxiety and frustration and nervousness, don't panic. And I understand everyone's nervous and it's going up and maybe I should sell and maybe I should move and I don't have kids in the school anymore, so why do I need to pay property taxes? Calm down. Permanent 2% cap. That's what it does for you, which I think psychologically is very important. I'm sorry.
Governor, your council had previously said that you'd sign a bill allowing undocumented immigrants to have access to driver's licenses, which they had until the early 2000s. Is that something you're still interested in pursuing, and if so, how?
That is not on the table that we're discussing now. It may come up later on in the legislative session, but it's not on the table now.
Sure. But is that something that you were willing to pursue outside of the budget?
Yeah, it's something we have talked about for years. It was always a non-starter. But yes, I'm willing to pursue it.
Governor, on criminal justice reform, just in three-way talks, what are the sticking points? What's holding it up?
The sticking points, I don't think anyone disagrees with 365 to 364. Discovery is close, and Alfonso, you correct me if I'm wrong. Speedy trial is close. Bail is the most complicated issue. I think everybody would say, fine, no cash bail. But then what are the grounds for preventive detention? And that's where the district attorneys are anxious and concerned. Which, by the way, on that I say, I know. That's what we heard from the Republicans for the past 7 years when this came up. That the district attorneys and the sheriffs weren't wed to cash, but they did want a standard that gave them the ability to withhold dangerous people. That's why we never got it done before. And it's the same DAs and the same political pressure, but that is the sticking point. I believe we can get past it, but it is a sticking point.
Do you support using dangerousness in a final proposal?
I support criminal justice reform, raise the age. When we did it, I understand both points of view, and I believe we can come to a consensus to get it passed, and that's what we're working on.
If they pass it outside the budget, before the budget, will you sign it?
Well, the budget is tomorrow, basically, right? So, yeah.
Some are saying they may do bills next week outside of the budget before you come to a budget review.
Oh, that doesn't matter to me.
And Governor, if I could, just on this issue, 49 states in this country have safety as a mechanism for determining pretrial detention, including the federal government. New York is the only state that has not included it. So if we eliminate cash bail, you need a mechanism for pretrial detention, and that's really what we're talking about. But every other state in the country has safety as a mechanism for determining pretrial detention.
See, the point about my point about the budget being a decision point. I know government too well, and I know legislative bodies too well. You can discuss this point ad infinitum. And by the way, we have for years. Well, if you don't have cash bail, then how do you know you're not releasing somebody who's dangerous, and what's the standard? I know. Everybody knows. There are no new facts to learn. There's no study to read. Make a decision. Make a decision. And let's see, I know your point of view, I know your point of view. I've heard it for years. Let's see if we can come together. And to inspire your flexibility, because Nick can be a little rigid, as we all know, we need a decision by the budget. Well, we want to keep talking. I know, but you will talk forever. We need a decision by the budget because there are no new facts. And I believe we can reach a middle ground. And I believe you both have valid concerns, and we can figure it out. And by the way, we will figure it out. Now, you have that budget looming, well, the governor won't do the budget without criminal justice reform. Is that an incentive for you to figure it out? Yes. You cannot leave this room until you and Nick agree on the standard. That will help you figure it out, because you want to eat at one point.
Governor, do you support a lifetime ban from the city's subways for serial sex offenders?
I support, this is another issue that's been discussed for years, and is one of those issues that I think common sense needs to prevail. I understand civil rights and civil liberties and access to transportation. But what I'm saying as part of this MTA reform plan is, if you are convicted of 2 sexual offenses on the subway system, where groping, touching, grinding is a major problem, and recidivism is a major problem, I fully support saying after the second conviction, you're banned from going back to the subway.
So would you support a lifetime ban then?
I would support a ban. How long a ban, I would be open. But look, the precedent is set. We have sexual predators who get locked up and get released, and then we say, common sense, we don't want them locating near a school, near areas where they have in the past targeted victims. You have people who target victims in the subways, and that's where they go. Many people, crowded areas, certain techniques, and that's where they go. We know because you see the recidivism numbers are so high. Why keep doing the same thing over and over and over again? 2 convictions for a sexual assault on a subway, you should be banned. I believe you need a legal change to do that. I don't believe it's that the MTA has been remiss. I believe you need a legislative change. Some jurisdictions have tried to do it administratively, order of trespass, order of exclusion. That really hasn't worked. Judges could, a DA could say to a judge on the second conviction, the DA could say to the judge on the first conviction, I want an order of exclusion where the person can't go back to the subway system. That would be in the DA's discretion, but I would support a law that says after the second conviction, you are banned from the subway system. How long, what would you say, how long?
Well, California did this a number of years ago, and they have different criteria depending on the number of incidents. So it could be for 90 days, it could be 180 days, it could be a year. There are different statutes around the country, and we're going to be studying those to determine the appropriate thresholds for banning people after a certain period of time.
Last question.
I'm in favor of the longer spectrum of ban.
Some large counties have said that they will opt out of marijuana legalization. The budget aside, do you think that puts a damper on that measure getting done this legislative session?
Well, this legislative session, I don't know. I think it was clear early on that the legislative leaders signaled that it was going to be done outside the budget. The Speaker was quite clear of that he thought it was better to do it outside the budget, and that it was complicated and it would take time. So, but after the budget, I'm hopeful in the legislative session it passes. Post-budget before June.
Some of the Long Island counties, Westchester, potentially not participating in having retail facilities there, that doesn't impact what lawmakers might be thinking.
Well, Westchester hasn't opted out.
I'm sorry,
Yeah, but you could pass it without Long Island members. I mean, right, the numbers are still there. And I don't know necessarily that a Long Island member couldn't vote for it because of the county. But is it a complication? Yes. But I don't think it's determinative.
Are you going to assume any money from revenue in the budget for marijuana?
No, but that's what I said. When we did the revision, adding the pied-à-terre tax to the MTA, because marijuana, I did not believe was going to be done in the budget. Remember, the first MTA proposal said electronic tolling congestion pricing, which raises about $15 billion. Internet sales was about $5 billion. Marijuana was about 2, I think. But that was my agreement with the mayor, Mayor de Blasio. Subsequent to that, it became clear, the speaker made statements about marijuana, that it's not going to be in the budget. I wanted to make sure we had a revenue stream for congestion pricing in the budget, so we substituted marijuana for the pied-à-terre tax as the congestion pricing mechanism because marijuana was not going to be done by the budget. Are those numbers right?
That's right.
You don't assume any marijuana revenue in
No.
the coming fiscal year. You never did.
Well, we did in the congestion pricing.
We had assumed marijuana revenue for the MTA capital plan, right? And the MTA capital plan goes into effect next year. So we were dedicating it entirely to the MTA capital plan. Now we've replaced that with the pied-à-terre tax. And as far as assuming any money in the rest of the budget as part of our financial plan, no. Also, any revisions now, right, have to get taken down. Any estimates, even in the out years, need to get revised downward to reflect the counties that have opted out.
On marijuana, from a strategic standpoint, the opponents, whether it's police chiefs or school groups, they've banded together, they've organized, they've gotten louder in the Capitol, quite frankly. Do you fear that you've given them too much time to kind of sink their teeth into the legislature and pick some opponents off?
No. Well, look, the budget is the first main vehicle, right? And in many ways, it's the easiest vehicle to do controversial things because you pass a budget, you vote on a budget, and there's a lot of things in the budget. So a budget is very often the easiest vehicle for a legislator to do something that is somewhat controversial. So this is really the first opportunity. If it's, when I have said in the past, and I'll say again, when it's not done in the budget, then it is, in my opinion, harder to do as a standalone bill because it's now just marijuana with a capital M. And it's a more difficult vote because it's clear what that vote was about. In a budget, it swallows many issues, and there are many different reasons why you would vote for a budget bill, even though it had some things in it that you didn't like. But the budget bill is the first opportunity, so I couldn't have gone earlier. And I said from day one that the marijuana issue was going to be controversial. There's no doubt about that.
Casinos, real quickly, Governor. The industry is saying if they opened one in the 5 boroughs, it would bring in about $1 billion a year. Assuming you ran into any trouble on congestion pricing, would you consider that a possible source of funding for the MTA, or is it, because it's a sin tax, it's not stable enough?
Well, my opinion, and I'm going to ask my esteemed budget director, we bid through a rigorous process the licenses for casinos. They are very lucrative, and we went through an elaborate process with a panel and a bid and a board. I believe what they're talking about is granting licenses to existing racinos and saying, you now have a racino, presto changeo, you now have a license to be a casino, without the bidding process. That I just would not support, because how would you ever come up with a market valuation of what that license is really worth. What the bidding does for you is it gives you, in a national competition, the best price. Everybody says that would be the golden franchise, right? If you had a casino in New York City. All right, if you were to go there, and I'm not even sure I would go there, it would have to be through a competitive bidding process, so we made sure New Yorkers got the best price. I don't think you could ever justify just going to an existing operator and say, you pay X and I'll make you a casino. How do you figure X? You want to comment on that, Rob?
We're also very skeptical of those numbers that the industry is throwing out there, and you also have to realize that if you were to do what they're asking, it would significantly cut into the VLT revenue that we're already receiving. So it's that revenue minus all the VLT revenue. We're also skeptical of their numbers. We had numbers from other casinos a few years ago, right? Those missed the mark significantly. So we'll look at any numbers they have, but we're skeptical of those numbers.
And I think, Zach, what they're saying is, if you convert the existing New York operators to casinos, they will pay, or one of them will pay, the liquidated damages penalty for the upstate casinos. Because remember, we said we wouldn't do a downstate casino for a period of years. This was an economic generator for upstate, and we had liquidated damages clauses. They're saying we'll pay those liquidated damages clauses. Yeah, but long term, you're still hurting the competitiveness of those upstate casinos, because this was always the point. We want the person driving from Queens upstate if they want to go to a casino. If you can now stay in Queens, you're going to hurt the upstate casinos long term, and just because you pay the liquidated damages, that's not enough for their long-term sustainability. And Rob's point, you also then basically crush the VLTs, because that traffic will also go to those casinos.
Don't the returns show that people are not driving from Queens to go to Monticello or any of those upstate casinos? They've all underperformed.
Yeah, I don't think that has anything to do with, well, they have, I don't know that they have all underperformed, but some have not performed to their expectation. Now, did they set the expectation too high? Was it a way of getting financing? I don't know. But do you know of any data that says people aren't traveling?
No, they haven't underperformed. We did our own analysis. They've underperformed relative to what the casino industry was estimating at the time, not to what we estimated at the time. So we're seeing the revenues that we expected and projected for school aid, which is where all of that money goes. They've underperformed because they overestimated their revenues, and then the amount of investment that they made was higher than they are getting based on their projections. But as far as the state is concerned, we're receiving all of the revenue that we had projected from all of the casinos.
That's a good point. Good forecasting. And by the way, Jesse, they're still the closest casino. You're in Queens. Monticello is still the closest casino. Now, unless you're saying people in Queens stopped going to casinos, but it's closer to go to Monticello than go to Atlantic City or Connecticut.
It seems like you're closing the door on simply awarding the casino licenses to the existing casinos, but are you closing the door on allowing a competitive bidding process and accelerating the casino licenses?
We have not even had the conversation about casinos. I have spoken to no one about casinos.
MGM and Genting are here, and Sands are here just about every day.
Do you work for them, by the way, just full disclosure? Okay.
Some of your former into.
Oh, I'm sure. I think they all do. I think that is the retirement from government plan, is you become a consultant to a casino.
But they haven't spoken to you?
No. No, and I've had no conversations with the leaders about it.
Yeah, if you cut spending, would you do things like roll back the film tax credits, roll back Excelsior tax credits? I mean, this is cash that goes out the door every year.
Well, look, the Senate is against tax credits, right? That was their position on Amazon. So if they need to find funding, I wouldn't be surprised if they propose cutting the film tax credit.
I was asking you. I mean, you're a member of this governing troika.
Yeah, but the problem is their numbers are too high.
Would you support rolling back some of this? You know, you're putting, I think it's 400 million plus on the film tax credits here. I forget the number for Excelsior.
Look, if the Senate could use that to close their gap, it is something I would be open to, you know, because these are hard choices. You can't say, Jimmy, you know, it's what I said, why it's hard. They want to say yes to everyone. That is human nature, and it's especially true for politicians. Nobody wants to say no. When I started, I didn't like to say no. It's not easy to tell someone no. But reality sets in. So, yeah, these are hard choices. If you said, and again, the Senate's position was very clear in Amazon. We are against tax incentives to bring business to New York, right? That's why Amazon is gone. I can see them being wholly consistent and saying, and that's why we're against the film tax credit, because it is the exact same point. And if it's between film tax credit and Medicaid, I would say film tax credit. If it's between film tax credit and education, I would say film tax credit. Cutting. But they have to, that's their decision. That's why I said, can we get the budget done? Yes. You're right up against the time where you would have to actually print bills and the machines have to work, but you have to make the decisions. And what was the gap on the numbers?
The Senate is off by $3 billion, and the Assembly's off by about $2 billion.
That's $3 billion they have to come down, and the Assembly has to come down $2 billion. Now, the Assembly did their budget. They knew their budget was based on revenues from new taxes that they knew were not going to be enacted, right? Senate wasn't going to do them. I wasn't going to do them. So the Assembly budget is a little easier to justify because they knew they put in revenues that weren't going to happen, so you reduce those revenues and theoretically there's a budget there. The Senate just added $3 billion of spending. And when they did their one house, the conference thinks that's real, you know. And now they have to go back and say, well, we have to cut $3 billion. And everyone just said, well, we raised education to 1.6, we're doing this, and they call up the lobbyist and they say, your education's 1.6, don't you love me? Yeah, but now you have to call them back and say, by the way, it's not 1.6. And you have to call the film tax credit person, and you have to, you know, that's hard. But it is up to them. It is up to them. I anticipated this situation, laid out the priorities. They have not changed. They are not going to change. And it's math. The numbers have to work. It's math in a very troubled economy.
This morning, Senator Flanagan said he spoke to you on the radio. Just wondering what those conversations are about.
He spoke to me on the radio?
Or on the radio, he said that you two had spoken.
Yeah. We had a basic conversation. You know, I worked with the senator for many years, and we talked about the budget and what I was thinking on the budget. His members have to vote on the budget also, so I gave him a briefing on the overview of the budget.
Does he generally agree with you on
No.
concerns?
No. But the same, these issues that we've been discussing here, luckily, some might say you missed the past 7 years. They've been the same issues I discussed with him for 7 years. So criminal justice reform was the same discussion. Many of these issues were the same discussion. And the same pressures, by the way. So he agrees with a permanent tax cap. He wouldn't agree with criminal justice reform. He thinks it's important that the budget stay at 2%. You know, the same principles that he's been consistent with. So some of the things we agree, some of the things we disagree.
Do you find it easier to work with him than the current Senate majority?
I find it easy to work with everybody, especially the press. I find it most easy to work with the press. Oh, look, it is easy, but the task is hard. It's not a relationship issue. The task is hard. You have a lot of desires that you want to fit into a small financial box. That is hard. And then you have policy issues where you have very different opinions, like criminal justice reform. Some issues that we've been talking about for years, that they won't even talk about, right? Criminal justice reform, you mentioned Senator Flanagan, I talked for years about closing Rikers Island. This is the progressive capital of New York. Everyone's more progressive than the next. New York City, I'm so progressive, I'm this, I'm this, I'm this. Okay, you have the worst jail in the state in your city. You have a majority minority that sits in that jail for 2 years, 3 years, doesn't have a day in court. The violence in the jail makes it one of the most dangerous jails in the nation. They've been talking about closing it, since I was 2 years old. I have a plan, I have another plan, I have a 10-year plan, a 7-year plan, a 6-year plan. How long? The worst jail. So, yeah, it's frustrating, but it's hard. It's hard. The task is hard. And it should be. You can make it easy, just fudge the numbers. You can make it easy. I've seen it done easy. Okay, there's actually another $3 billion. We changed the forecast. By the way, this forecast was done by the controller, right? So this is not my forecast or consensus. This was the controller's forecast that we're working on. All right, just assume $3 billion more, and then we can go home, get it done on time. That doesn't work because the numbers are reality, and then in 3 months or 6 months, we have a problem. And again, 3 months, 6 months, we may already have a problem when the president's budget comes out and says $2 billion cut to Medicaid. So we have to do it, and when I said we have to do it right, it has to be real. That's what I mean, on the numbers. Okay, thanks, guys.